think people don't understand mankind's capacity for malevolence as well, because we're all, generally speaking, we're all quite good at heart. People try to be good. We fail, but it takes a special type of person to lie and be okay with it and not have a conscience about it. Most people don't. Most people don't have it in them to do that type of thing. I'm kind of in the field of learning about malevolence. I nothing surprises me with what mankind is capable of. I can believe we've been lied to about this type of thing. But most people cannot wrap their head around the concept that somebody could tell such a lie. Most people, when they encounter evil, don't come away from it the same because it changes them.
The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Vitruvian Podcast, a podcast in pursuit of truth and personal renaissance. I'm your host, Zachschenken. Today, I'm joined by Paul Stobbs, aka Understanding Conspiracy. Paul is known most for his theory that the Nephilim looked like clowns and is author of the book with the same name, but Paul's work spans across the entire so-called conspiracy or truther world, and he's a veteran in the game, amassing over 80,000 subscribers on YouTube across a decade of meaningful work. Today, we'll cover Christianity, the Nephilim, BlackRock, Tartaria, and the potential that Christ may have already returned, as well as much, much more. I'm excited for our conversation today. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, super excited about today's conversation. Obviously, we've just been briefly talking a lot about the truther world, and I think I've alluded to this before with my audience, but going down, as they say, the rabbit hole on your own is quite literally a dark and scary path. It's like winding yourself through the woods alone at night. And what you just touched on, which is encouraging people in their truther journey based on your own experience. Walk me back a little bit. Obviously, it's been a while, but how did you enter into the truther world? What was your, we'll call it red pill moment, your initial waking up phase, and how did that journey look, bringing you towards where we are today? I know it's a broad question, but I think laying out your experience helps people find their story in yours.
Sure. Well, it's actually been a while since I've told the story, to be honest. So I'm thankful for the opportunity again. Maybe it'll help remind me of where I've come from because it has been a while. So I wasn't raised in any particular religious household. First of all, just as a caveat, I wasn't. I wouldn't say my family was anti-religious. They were just a-religious. It just was not a thought. Just was not on the radar. Not interested in that type of thing. Typical working class background. Dad worked in a factory. Mum worked in schools as a teaching assistant. Things like this. And I was just an artist, forever an artist. Always painting, always drawing, always doing something, observing the world, and quietly drawing away in the corner, not really playing sports with everybody else or interested in anything like that. So I've always been that type of person. Just observant and looking for beauty in the world, and happy to sit quietly and think, and enjoy the silence. So as I grew up, I did tend to slip into kind of like a secularist, atheistic, anti-religious worldview, which I think is pretty stereotypical for any edgy teenager, and because that's just the school I grew up in, like a non-religious environment, and scientism dominates the education system. It's kind of, I naturally fell into the religious people are just idiots who don't know what they're talking about, who are just scared of death, who make up fairy tales to make themselves feel better. Typical Richard Dawkins claptrap, And I kind of just was happy in that world until, when I got to the age of 16, I was in the middle of doing my studying arts and graphic design and things like this at college. College is not the same as your college in America. It's like the last 2 years of your high school college. We have a separate thing for it. But I was focusing my art, and what I do. And I was also focusing in on exploring consciousness because I was a heavy weed smoker back in my teen years, and I was seeking out answers, I suppose, to the meaning of life. I was constantly having discussions with my friends, about philosophy and what it means to exist and kind of hashing out all the basics, like you do when you're in your early teens, or the stuff that would sound cringe to discuss about now as an adult, but at the time you think you're really deep, but those are the questions you need to start asking yourself at an early age. And we went deep into it, me and my very small friend group. But I had this one friend who I kind of grew up with. He was very much scientifically minded, but he'd been showing me these videos online of people doing Salvia divinorum. I don't know if you've heard of Salvia before, but it's kind of like an extremely potent psychedelic herb. Probably more potent than DMT, to be honest. But at the time, when I was young, it was legal. You could get it in like what we call head shops in the UK, which are like where they sell like bongs and things like paraphernalia, but you can get it behind the counter, Salvia divinorum. It's supposed to be like a legal herb, a legal high type thing. And it's because it wasn't on anyone's radar at this point. Like no one knew about it. It was just this random thing. And I was watching people online just inhale this thing and completely lose themselves. And they were seeing something and they were just like gone, and I was confused. I was like, what are they seeing exactly? Like curiosity got the better of me. So at the age of 16, me and my friend got some, and we did this extremely powerful entheogen, and I wasn't prepared at the age of 16 to see what I saw, and I think I distinctly remember we recorded it, but I have no idea where that video is these days. It's on some hard drive somewhere, but I remember seeing myself on the video, and I take it, I sit down, and then I just go pale, and then my eyes go wide, and I sit back, and I literally just say no out loud, just no, like it's like the fear was in my voice, Then I was gone, and I went to another dimension basically, and I felt like my brain was being scrambled, not like because I'm losing brain cells, more like my very essence, my soul, my being was being taken apart, and just becoming one with reality in a way that was just didn't line up with my worldview prior to that as a secularistic, if I can't see it, I don't believe it, atheistic type. There's no such thing as a spirit realm type of person, but coming into contact visually with something like that, it really mixes things up in your brain a little bit, So that was a kind of a fire sparked for me at an early age. And I didn't know what to do with that. So I kind of sat on it for a long time. And I was still smoking weed regularly. But then when I got to university at the age of 20, 19, I would have been 19, maybe 20 or something like that. I really got back into kind of exploring consciousness through psychedelics in other ways. So I was getting my hand on everything else you could imagine, And when you're in university, it's easy to get hold of that kind of stuff, especially in the UK, because everybody knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy. And once you've got a contact for cannabis, you have a contact for everything, So it just becomes this ridiculous situation. And as a person, I would say I was hedonistic, egotistical, out for myself, pleasure-driven existence type of, which tend to be the new age bent, you would call it, or something like that. But I wouldn't, like I said, I would never would have called myself a new ager. I wasn't into like chakra alignments or crystals or like dream catchers or anything like that, or palm readings, and nothing like along that line of things. I was still more of a logistically minded, everything explained through psychology, archetypical Jungian archetypes of the collective consciousness, that type of stuff. I was very much getting into the Eastern Tao religious philosophies and what it means to have opposites in the world and dualism, and trying to get to grips with these concepts. And psychedelics go hand in hand with that worldview, So I got my hand on stronger and stronger things. But at the same time, while doing my degree in fine art, studying next to this beautiful cathedral in Lincoln, while tripping every other day and microdosing every other day, while also just going out on the weekend, getting absolutely hammered and high off whatever I can, and living the hedonistic lifestyle out for myself, trying to find meaning in the world and thinking meaning is in the pursuit of pleasure rather than the pursuit of meaning itself, and it's kind of, I was kind of burning myself out throughout this process. And then I fell into the rabbit hole for the first time. And because it was 2012 and the end of the world was around the corner, the Mayan calendar was coming to an end, and everyone was saying the world's going to end online. And I was like, what is this? What are people seeing that is making them believe the world is going to end? I have to see this. I have to know what they are seeing, And I went down that route from that basis, that coming here from the the esoteric side, shall we say, because also I was dabbling in things like, alchemical hermeticism and Gnosticism and these type of concepts, as well as the Taoism. And I was kind of blending it all together, very much making myself my own God in my own head, like everything's here because of consciousness, and I am consciousness. We're all consciousness. We're all one consciousness that has decided to forget that it's that and experience individuality, and have very much typical Alan Watts type stuff, Terence McKenna type thinking, and I was in that realm. Then I fell into the conspiracy world because of this Mayan calendar stuff. And one thing led to another. And next thing I know, I'm discovering that the whole world's run by secret societies who worship Lucifer. And it just became that typical process of one thing after another, one domino falling after another, because you dipped your toe in and something grabbed you and pulled you in. That's how it seems to be when it comes to conspiracy. And I was at university, and it became my subject matter for my artwork because I was doing a degree in fine art. And I created, as a result, this channel called Understanding Conspiracy, because it's like, these people have such fascinating information that they know some things, and there's so many subtopics and categories you can go into, and so many different people from different backgrounds and belief systems all kind of contributing to this overall thing of conspiracy. But it's a mess. There's no coherence between anything. No one's working together. And that sadly, the people talking about these things are insane and look insane and sound insane. No one wants to take them seriously. And it's sad. But I'd worked in retail and in sales and over the phone, cold calling people. And I knew enough about people to know that it's look, people buy the person selling the product. They don't care about the product itself. They want an experience. They want the person who's selling it to them to make them feel special in some way, or at least they want the salesman needs the buyer to buy into them, And it's it doesn't matter if you've got the truth. It doesn't matter how good the truth is. No one's going to buy it if you're the guy selling it to them and you look like an absolute nut job. They're going to look at you and go, I want nothing to do with that information that he's trying to sell me because he looks insane. I don't want to end up like him. And I kind of made it my own personal mission to change the image of conspiracy as a culture and try and encourage people to be better ambassadors for the truth, to represent themselves properly, be more coherent with their presentation styles, meet people where they're at, and gain the social skills necessary to kind of communicate messages more clearly in a calm, cool, collect manner that people can relate to. So they'll actually be encouraged to want to discover what it is you're trying to tell them, because it's not easy to tell the people the world's being run by psychopaths. You have to be able to tell it to them in a way that's palatable, So that's what the channel was as a result of this kind of dive into it. But at the same time, while I was searching out the truth through psychedelics, I was hitting dead ends quite regularly. I'm realizing like my life is getting significantly worse as a result of what I'm doing, searching for the answers. I was burning out my synapses. I was burning the candle at both ends. I was constantly seeking pleasure, but only finding pain at the bottom of that, heartbreak and the rest of it, as well as physical and mental. It was just, I was becoming a husk of myself. I didn't know who I was. And I was so lost in the collective consciousness concept that it's kind of like it's the struggle to find meaning. Any of that really became a big problem that was having detrimental effects in my own life and my own psyche. And when you go into the conspiracy realm, everybody's got an answer, but I kept bumping into the Christian angle of how to explain the conspiracy. And I didn't want to believe any of that. I was like, those people are crazy. I don't want anything to do with that stuff. I'm not looking to join a cult, And it's I just ignored it for many years, but I kept hearing a sermon here and a lecture there and a presentation here, that kind of explained a lot actually about our history, where we come from, why we have demons, why we have these secret societies, and how it all goes back to Jesus Christ and what he did. And that was nebulous. That's a nebulous concept when you say it, what did he do exactly, but it's I kept realizing he did something and it's pissed everybody off. And now we have this controlling system that's trying to undo everything, whatever he did, And I didn't want to accept any of it, but it came to a point at the end of my degree where I was kind of completely burnt out. Again, I'd explored every other avenue possible. I'd seen some things. I'd seen the spirit realm. I've seen these things, these entities. I've seen the jesters. You know what I mean? I've seen that what I see with my own eyes on a day-to-day basis is not all that there is. There is truly a spiritual nature to reality. I can't deny that just through personal experience. But what does it mean exactly? And is there a God? How does this work? And I've got these Christians telling me, yes, there is a God. And he wants you to talk to him. Like, you can reach out to him and ask. I kept hearing this asking you'll receive type of stuff. So I did. I got to this point in my life where I didn't have any direction. My university had ended. I had no job, nowhere to live or anything. I didn't know what I was doing with myself. I had this channel and this degree in art for whatever that's worth. I didn't know what to do with my life or anything. And I had all this stuff in my mind about the world is a mess and it's completely controlled by evil people and malevolence around every corner with agendas to completely kill us, destroy us, subjugate us, and make us into slaves, basically, be that through mind control or wages, whatever you want to decide, or whatever it is. That's I would call that a low point in my life, borderline suicidal low points. So I literally said, with nothing left to give or no answers to go, all right, God, if you're real, show me. Use me. Fine. If you're real, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Just, I'm yours. Fine. I don't know what to do anymore. I need help. Again, I was desperation. I was like, I just asked, I need help. Show me what the truth is. And then I had a bath. And I know I only add this because I wouldn't say if it wasn't so bizarre. And, maybe it means nothing. Maybe it means something. But I hadn't had a bath in a tub in like, since I was a child. I'd only ever lived in a house that had shower cubicles. And I hadn't stayed in any hotels with baths. I don't have time to have a bath on holiday because I'm doing stuff, so I've always had a shower. But this time I was in this hotel. I was at a party, funnily enough, for my brother-in-law. Now it was for his marrying my sister party, a stag do, as we call them. I was in a different city, and I had this bath after I asked God to help me. And then as soon as I put my head under water, I just shot out because I felt this mass rush of energy in my chest, like this warm, I have to move energy type feeling, you know what I mean? Like raw power running through me. And like I was overcharged. I didn't know what, and I had to just leap out of the bath. And I thought I was having a panic attack, to be honest. And I looked in the mirror and I calmed down and I was like, I don't know what to make of that. But from that day, things significantly began to change in my life that I can only put down to being supernatural. I quit cannabis, haven't touched the stuff since. I haven't touched a drug since that day. I mean, I say the hardcore drugs, the silly drugs. I still smoked nicotine, but I've been weeding myself off, and I quit that 2 years ago completely after being on an e-cig and putting it down to next to no nicotine levels, making my own stuff, So it's kind of been through the process of detoxifying, breaking all my addictions, because suddenly from that day on, things were very different in my mind. I couldn't do those things anymore without feeling guilt, without feeling conviction. Something was different. It's kind of, I would smoke a cigarette and I'd have this voice in my head like, what are you doing? Why? And I've never had that before. It's like I finally had a conscience. It was very odd. And the things I used to seek that I found pleasurable, I didn't care about them anymore. I didn't want them anymore. It's like I had a huge rewiring of my brain. Like nothing. It's like the flesh wanted to do these things that I'd always done and got used to through habit, but the brain was like, no. It's a very weird, like a contradiction within oneself. It's like something was fighting with my very essence within me. It's like a war was raging inside me. And it was the flesh versus the spirit in some sense. It's the only way I can really explain it. And I was kind of caught in the middle, So, like I said, I dropped these addictions and I became a different person. And I started seeking out God and asking him, I already asked. And he clearly opened the door and made me a new being in a very literal sense. And I kind of had to study the word to try and get to grips with what this is all about. What is this then? What have I got myself into type of situation? And you read the story of Christ, and this man talking about creating a kingdom and destroying the old systems, and promising eternal life after death in his kingdom, in this new world, and this new heaven and earth at the end of it all. And how it's kind of, you can't save yourself, and this world is nothing but corruption and will basically drag you down to hell with it. But you can become a new creation in God, free from its vices, and be saved in the end from falling victim to its inevitable end. If you become one with the world, you'll go the way of the world, which is destruction in the end. And it's kind of, you try and make sense of these allegories and these ideas, and it's confusing for a long time. It really is. And I'm still learning to this day exactly what it means to be a Christian. But I believe, only through these spiritual experiences and these personal transformational experiences, there's power in this, all of this, especially in his name. And I had some serious weird experiences after this point with demons. And again, I wouldn't have believed it if it hadn't happened to me personally, but it's kind of, I kept having sleep paralysis where I couldn't move, and then I was seeing demons, shadow entities sat on my chest and tormenting me. Spiders, shadow spiders coming down towards me, masses of legs, really horrible stuff. When I was wrenching myself awake, screaming, stuff was just happening, which I was terrified of. It had never happened before until I had obviously had this experience in this bathtub in this hotel, and I was then learning about spiritual warfare, and I was learning that not only is the world corrupt and fallen, but there's also a spiritual enemy in this world that's literally out to get you. And I kind of realized, in maybe looking back in hindsight, but before I was saved, I never met these things because they had no reason to reveal themselves to me because I was already lost. What more could they do? They were happy for me to think they didn't exist or to think they were just reflections of some collective consciousness, archetypical symbolism of some kind. They were happy just to let me believe those things, and why reveal ourselves to him? But I feel like in hindsight, it was more of a, well, if we can't have you, nobody can type of situation, because I was a useful vessel for them, I think, up until this point. I was smoking, having casual sex, taking drugs, doing the worst possible things, hedonistic lifestyle, seeking out pleasure. And I think the demons in me enjoyed that. They were happy for me to think they didn't exist while I continued to do these things that they could feel through my own senses vicariously. And these are the type of things you begin to learn about how demons operate. And it's like spiritual parasites in a way. They parasitically feed off whatever you do to yourself, and they experience it for themselves. And this started me into my field of study into biblical history, the Nephilim, the watchers who created giants in an antediluvian past, the disembodied spirits of these giants becoming demons we have today, the collusion between these entities in the spirit realm and the secret societies of today, and then the overarching war in heaven and the continuous war against mankind through spiritual entities. And it all started to click into place, and things were being revealed, shall we say. I asked and I was receiving, and it culminated in me having all this knowledge of the psychedelic world and understanding about jesters that people see in the DMT realm. And I clicked and said, well, if these things, the only disembodied spirits we have from a biblical perspective, the only things there are the disembodied spirits of Nephilim. And if we see jesters when we're there, then these things must be the Nephilim disembodied in some respect. And this is where I started going down the Nephilim look like clowns, the level of research on my channel. And that just became my focus for 8 years. And I'm like 43 episodes or something into a series dedicated to it on my channel. I've written the first book summarizing the first half of the work in the history, and I'm writing the second book now. And I've sold about 3,000 copies in the first year. And it doesn't seem to be slowing down at all anyway. And that became my big field of study for many years, kind of fleshing out demonology, spiritual warfare, and the tangible, reaching out to people, having stories told to me, and also studying how a clown is quite literally a representation of a demon in a very literal sense, created by secret societies, modeled after the Rakshasa demons of India in the 1700s. And it's just followed on into today. And I've also discovered that dressing like these things is a way of channeling them. And the clown costume was just our version of the costumes worn in many cultures all over the earth who channel their ancestor spirits. It's just our version of their costume, and we call it a clown, thinking it's something fun for the kids. So it's just an occult image. It's a hidden meaning behind it that we're not supposed to know unless you're initiated. And I kind of rolled with that for many years and did the podcast circuit, grew my profile doing that. And it seemed like I had a purpose all of a sudden, and God had truly led me to that point, and I wouldn't have had any of it without him. And I wouldn't have seen any of this without him in many ways. And as time went on, I had to take a 5-year break in 2018. I kind of got kicked off of the internet because my workplace at the time, I was working as a manager at a supermarket, found my channel, and they kind of said, you can't be a manager and have this channel. You can't do it. If the staff find it, you say some controversial, offensive things on there, and we're a multicultural, diverse company, and if one of our staff members gets offended by something you say, then we'll have to let you go. We're not going to be able to defend you. We'll have to side with them. So I stepped down from making videos and said, okay, I'll just get rid of the channel then. Not my proudest moment, to be honest. It was a moment of weakness, a capitulation I'm not proud of, but I needed the money, and I was scared. I was genuinely scared. What I need the money to survive, and I just got this promotion, this position. I wasn't ready to let it go. So I spent 5 years being a supermarket manager, living a life of hell and misery and unhappiness that I just could not stand or bear. I don't get me wrong, I was good at the job, but it's not who I am. I'm not a supermarket manager. I'm a conspiracy theorist, So I kind of had to wrestle with myself, and I got to the point where after 5 years in abuse and being attacked by the public and all sorts of horrible things happening, going all the way through the COVID event as well, I got to this point where it's like, I'm quitting this. I can't do this anymore. It's not who I am. I'm wasting myself. I'm wasting my life here. And me and my wife started a photography company, and he did well in the first year. And then the second year, the sales went flat, but the channel had started up again and was actually doing quite well, to the point where I could actually continue to be self-employed, just be a YouTuber. So this has become my job now. And carrying on, boxing off the Nephilim clown stuff, writing the book, publishing that, this new topic was kind of always in the back of my mind about the millennial reign of Christ. And I knew enough about biblical history and the Bible in general by this point that I couldn't let this topic go, but I didn't know what to really do with it, because I'd watched this whole Tartarian thing rise and fall and kind of make its namesake in the conspiracy world. And there clearly was evidence that there's some kind of civilization that was around not that long ago that's been wiped off the map, and the technology and the architecture was incredible. But how does that fit into the biblical narrative? I had some questions to answer, I had some wrestling to do. And it turns out there is biblical precedence for the whole thing in Revelation 20, where it says that the devil's let loose for a short season, where he gets to rule and gather an army from all the nations which he deceives. Immediately after 1,000-year reign, where Christ and his saints rule on earth as kings and priests and rulers. And it turns out, I've now ended up becoming some kind of de facto figurehead as a result of talking about it so much, this concept that we might be living in the time after the millennial reign of Christ on earth. And it's been certainly a huge faith solidifier for me, because prior to that, most of conspiracy Christians are looking for tribulation to come upon us, looking for the end of the world to happen. They're looking for the Antichrist to appear and the mark of the beast to appear and Armageddon to come upon us and the wrath, destruction upon the earth, and they're waiting for Christ to return to establish his 1,000 years. I've discovered, and our community has kind of rolled with and keeps finding more evidence for, that's already happened. It happened about 1,250 years ago. That's when it began. And we're in the little season of Satan, it turns out. And again, this for me, that it's been a wild journey. And that's kind of who I am and what I'm all about. And I talk about every topic on my channel, conspiracy in general. I rolled with the initial starting point of we need to sort out the culture of conspiracy so people take us more seriously. We need an image overhaul. And I have a thing called the Truth of Therapy Sessions. That's my own podcast, where we kind of get meta about the journey of being a truther and telling your friends and family and the pitfalls we all have along the way. I do a series called Tips for Truthers as well, where I kind of share advice on how to do these things and how to navigate learning information that shatters your paradigms on a regular basis. And I interview and talk with many people, collaborations of all sorts of beliefs on a regular basis, just because I'm trying to create cohesion in the culture, to be honest. And like I said, I've just been doing this so long now, I'm lost in it, I suppose. But that's my entire story summed up for you there. That's who I am.
Well, I mean, first of all, round of applause. That was an incredible, concise journey, and so much to go into, so much to hold space for, some pretty intense bouts and periods there. But I would say the thing that jumps out to me, or the thing that I want to ask about, is, I guess this is a sort of meta principle, but coming from we'll call it like a skeptical background of materialism, secularism, and then moving into sort of like the metaphysics. Obviously, you started to gain felt experience through your use of psychedelics. So there was like kind of an undeniable like inner knowing, like, okay, something is going on here. But additionally, when you're trying to constellate, all right, what is actually this experience? You're going through different writings and eventually finding yourself towards the Christian story. Obviously, when you spoke to, God the Father and like invited what I would understand to be the Holy Spirit into you, Now you have another tethered felt experience. So like I would never step in and say like you could deny that experience to yourself, but being a conspiracy theorist and being a truther, there is also the aspect in Christianity and choosing that label that you're tethered to the book, for instance, and the historicity that comes with that. I'm curious about your exploration of the historicity and epistemology around the Bible, given its like origin. And I can bring up common sort of objection points, which I'm sure you're well aware of, but the nature of Christ's teaching and then how it has been, I don't know, tethered to the, I'll call it like big church or the church state in
Mm-hmm.
the entities of, say, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and then now kind of the Protestant ocean of different theologies.
Yeah.
You're choosing now to confidently say, I'm a Christian, I'm a Christ believer. What specifically does that mean to you, and what parts of the Bible, if not all of it, are you tethered to?
Well, I won't call myself a member of any particular denomination. I'm a non-denominational Christian contrarian. That's pretty. I'm everything I say and talk about. You're not going to hear in a church. And I tried the church thing in my local area, and those people are not my people, unfortunately. I mean, I don't doubt that they're saved or the heart isn't for Jesus and all that type of thing, and they haven't accepted the sacrifice and believe it, and that they're saved. But they're doing is just focusing on the milk, and they are not interested in the details or the meat of the matter, which is what I'm interested in. I want to know everything. I want to know the truth. I want to get into the hard questions, and I want to understand the gritty, horrible histories and everything about it, But they're not really interested in that. It's more like a country club type Sunday meet up every Sunday to have tea and coffee, and then they feel good about themselves and go home, And it's kind of, that's just not what a conspiracy theorist Christian is. We're looking for the answers, and we're at war, in our minds with spiritual wickedness in high places and people out to besmirch and belittle us and destroy Christianity as it is. But at the same time, I understand there's issues with like orthodoxy and the Catholic Church and the idea of mankind interceding on your behalf to Jesus and God, and it's kind of that I don't believe any of that's biblically based or real. I think authority and institutions have corrupted the simplicity of Christ's sacrifice and what it takes to be saved for power and influence over people. And that's just the nature of mankind, unfortunately. So I don't subscribe to churchianity, as I call it. I'm just a follower of the way, which is the way of Christ and what he preached and what he said, which is quite simple, really. Just believe on him and you will be saved. There's no way to the Father except through him. He is the way, the truth, and the life. It's a free gift of salvation. Your works will not get you there. They're all filthy rags in the eyes of God. You need to be covered by the blood of the Lamb and his sacrifice. He is the last sacrifice that needed making. No more rituals will save you. There's no point doing anything like that whatsoever. It's simply accept that his sacrifice was for you and love your God with all your heart and sincerely believe, and you will be saved in the end. When it comes to final judgment, you'll be covered by him. God won't see you and all your sin. He'll see his son, and you're through, basically. Because it seems like there is this legalistic aspect to reality. There's laws in place, and we have all transgressed the law, and there's nothing we can really do to undo that situation. And that's the basic gospel. But then when you start getting into like the Book of Enoch and you start researching these extra biblical texts and the pseudepigraphica and the apocrypha, you start to realize there's also a spiritual wickedness out there that kind of put us in this position as well. So God's long suffering, God's patient, and he understands that, yeah, we messed up, but we were kind of tricked as well. So he has mercy on us for that reason. And thank God he does, And that's kind of my gospel. It's quite simple, really. And there are plenty of Judaizers out there who want to tell you, you have to follow this ritual, you have to do this, you have to worship on this day, you also have to do the feast holidays, and you have to use the correct sacred name, blah, 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 blah. I'm sorry, but they're overcomplicating it. And I think it's because they want to make themselves feel special, to be honest. I think it makes them feel happy. It's kind of like, yeah, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm a better Christian than you. Yeah, I'm saved, but I'm and you're saved too, but I'm more saved than you because I do all these other things. And it's a point of pride for a lot of them. And I think they give Christianity a really bad name, to be honest. And they're the people that get pointed to as the crazies that put people off from even considering the concept and the idea. Now, look, I think the word of God, yes, the Bible is there, but it's also words on ink written by man. And I think if you look through the texts, they're pretty consistent going back to the Greek, the Coptic text, and there's not really much change at all in translation, I would say. And I would encourage anybody who does study the Bible to read the translations from different sources and see the differences for yourself and pass it out. But the core gospel is the same. Nothing's changed, And I think there's been efforts to corrupt the word ever since Protestantism and the reproduction of the Bible and the new modern translations, which are removing verses and changing things. And I tend to stick with the 1611 KJV just because it seems like the earliest, least corrupted version of the text we have from the original Greek, which had the most eyes on it at the time and the most understanding and interpretations. But fundamentally, my faith isn't because of the book. It's because of tangible, real personal experiences that I can't convey to other people. It's having a scene in my own living room where I'm dying and darkness seeps in from the corner of my vision and I go paralyzed on the floor, and the mandala opens up in front of me and I can literally feel my own soul being torn out of my body. And the only thing that saved me in that moment was whispering, "Jesus, help me." And it stopped instantly and I was back in the room. So things like that aren't really easy to drop once you've had those experiences. So my faith isn't in a book. It's in the living word, the word made flesh, which was Jesus Christ. And that's it, really. And you can have a relationship with him if you just ask, and it's not like you hear voices in your head type of situation, though I think some people will claim that's what they're having. It's a still, quiet voice, an influence, a conscience that guides you in everything you do and convicts you when you know you're doing something wrong. And if you follow it, your life will improve tangibly. And I never got any such results following any other world of religion prior to that, where I was chasing my own tail thinking I was God, and it's kind of, if you want results, I would say the Christian way is the best way. And you can know his word because there are billions and billions of Bibles printed on this earth, and you have no excuse, really, I would say. But I'd say be a Berean, study it properly, and go and find the problems that are out there. Go find where people throughout history have tried to corrupt the word and the motivations behind it. Go and see these differences. Go and see why Schofield added his own footnotes and then Darby reinterpreted them to create the rapture doctrine, which is completely unbiblical. It's kind of, there's loads of problems with Christianity so-called today through futurism and what we have. But I would say, just like the academic institutions, the medical institutions, the monetary institutions, the financial stuff, the political institutions, the educational institutions, name an institution, it's been completely co-opted and corrupted not for our benefit whatsoever. I'd say it's the exact same for the seminary institutions and our religious institutions, especially Christendom. There's a conspiracy afoot here. If you want to keep it simple, I would say just read the word for yourself and keep it simple. Don't join an institution where they will require you to do it their way and only their way, because that's when you create division. That's when you create us against them. That's where pride seeps in, and that's where problems arise with Christianity. And look, I get it from an outsider's perspective. Christianity is a mess. It is, but as I would say, that isn't a relationship with Christ. You don't need a building. You just need to ask and have a personal relationship with him and mean it, being sincere. Asking, you will receive. It's real. I can only say that again from personal experience. I can't convince anybody of anything. I know I can't. I can't intellectualize it enough for anybody. It's just not possible. I think people need the experience to truly believe, and if you're lucky enough, maybe God will call you out and give you that experience, or ask, and maybe you'll receive. That's my basis of my faith, and I know it's not the most academic answer, but it's the simplest answer from a personal experience,
Well, yeah, and there's nothing less profound about it, and I can feel the power in your words. So I would never step into your experience or from the outside condemn your statement of faith or internal belief. I guess what I want to do though is for my own exploration, just to give context to you about myself. Like I was raised, I shouldn't even say raised Christian. I was educated Christian. It was kind of like conceptually in the home, but I didn't see a tremendous amount of fruit in my parents' lives. They didn't force us to go to church, but I was sent to Christian education, so I heard all of the language that you're using for my entire life. And I was a believer when I was a little kid because it's just like what I was told to do. I was baptized, all that stuff, and then stepped away from the faith. But I was never in the camp of like secular atheism. I always believed that there is a God and a benevolent creator. but I'm still exploring the Christ thing, because it's like, again, like you're saying, when you explore every rabbit hole, it's something is there, right? Like there's kind of this undeniable through line in this kind of epic of time, aeon, whatever. Christ is a significant character in this like 2,000 year window.
Yeah.
So what does that exactly mean? And one of the things that I'm currently exploring, last year I actually read the Bible in its entirety, because I told myself, like, I owe it to myself to at least know and have read it for myself, because so much of that Christian education was, hey, memorize this Bible verse and we'll do a lesson on it and this is what it means. And as you're alluding to, the churchianity is always that, whether it's fully Catholic and you literally don't read the Bible because it's read in Latin to you by somebody else and then told for what it's supposed to be, or any of the denominations they're following, it's typically somebody picking some section and then telling you, this is how you take it into your life. And as a true seeker of truth, it's just not good enough. It's not good enough for me. So I needed to read it for myself. But the reason I will press and continue to be curious on like the historicity of the text itself, because your confidence comes from the simplicity of the gospel. That's awesome. But the only thing we have today of Jesus's words is just that. It's the gospels from the Bible, right? We don't have extra biblical historical sources like, say, Herodotus or something else. Like, people allude to the existence of Christ, right? So I'm not denying that he was a man. I absolutely believe that based on my own research. But as far as the word or the way that you're talking about, we know that way from the Bible. And the Bible itself, like the gospel texts, to my knowledge, the most close to the death of Christ would have been about 100 years later. Is that incorrect? Because the Pauline epistles are the first letters of the Bible or books of the Bible that are written, but they're around 10 to 15 years after the death of Christ, dated, based on what we have today. So again, all I'm saying is that, like, I'm curious how you have so much confidence that, like, these are the words of Christ and this is the way, given what you also know about Judaism and its history and those involved in writing the Bible, considering a lot of the Bible was written by Jews who were also the
Well,
murderers of Christ
if you
himself.
want to go off of mainline history and the chronology we've been given, then there was a time in the early first century where there were these strange people growing in numbers that Rome did not know what to do with, and there's many writings about. I think Pliny the Elder or Pliny the Younger was writing to the Caesar, trying to explain, like, what am I supposed to do with these Christians? They seem harmless enough, like they don't break the law, they're really peaceful, but they're not following our way. They seem like a strange, superstitious people, and it's kind of, but they're not, as far as I can see, they're not doing anything legally wrong. And he's kind of pleading, he's kind of like trying to cover his own ass, basically, to the Caesar, because the Caesar at the time was being pretty, like, horrible to Christians, and he didn't want to be seen as a Roman kind of leader who wasn't doing the right thing to Christians. Otherwise, he would get punished, So it's kind of like he was sending a letter out to the Caesar saying, just letting you know, we have this Christian problem. I want to know what the right thing to do is. I'm asking for your opinion, And the Caesar said, leave them be for now, but we're going to do something about them soon, basically. Hopefully it'll just go away, is what they were hoping for at the time. But it didn't go away. They kept growing in numbers. So we have historical records outside of Christ that there was a growing group of people following his way. And that goes all through the early millennium, the first millennium, the first, and we have hundreds of years of that so-called text dated randomly to times where we assume other times. But I don't trust the historical record as being chronologically put together in the right order, to be honest. And this is what a lot of our recent research in the millennial reign of Christ already happening is kind of be proving to us, and we have secular researchers like Gunnar Heinsohn, who passed away recently, who has his own work explaining quite clearly through just a scientific stratigraphy, about layers and what we find in archaeological dig sites. 700 years doesn't exist that we supposedly say does exist in the first millennium. We only actually have 300 years worth of history for the first millennium documented through actual artifact evidence and what we see, So many of these writings of, let's say, the early church fathers, which came hundreds of years afterwards at the Nicene Creed and this type of thing, or, you have, like you said, the first epistle writings were hundreds of years afterwards. I don't think they were. I think they were actually slap bang in the time it was all happening around the same time. And I think modern history that has chronologized those early years has separated these events by hundreds of years when they were right next to each other, a few years at best. John the Revelator didn't write Revelation in Patmos in jail in the 90s. He probably wrote it in the 60s, just before the destruction of the temple, because he prophesied there would be the destruction of the temple in Revelation. So it's kind of, historians have said he must have written it after the fact because he was so accurate, rather than believing he could have prophesied something so accurate before the fact. So they've dated it afterwards, And I don't trust the historical record, basically. I'm a conspiracy theorist. I think it's all complete bunk. I think everything happened quite quickly in the first 100 years. And then afterwards, after the destruction of the temple, there was a very quick decline, destruction events, and then a cataclysm, which kind of buried everything, most of Rome, after all the volcanoes kind of went off. And after that subsided, I believe the resurrection took place and the millennial reign of Christ was established for 1,000 years on earth. And in about 1077, roughly, is when it ended and when the little season of Satan began. And we're kind of living at the back end of that now, 250 years later, roughly. Historically, if you take 700 years off of our timeline, we're actually in the year 1325, something like that, roughly, give or take, And then if you, again, take the date of 1077, 1076, and add 700 years, which we have done, that's 1776, the establishment of secret societies, the Bavarian Illuminati, and America as an independent nation, with 100 years later a statue of Lucifer being erected, you know what I mean, with the light bearer. So I think chronologically speaking, we've been lied to massively about a lot of history, but I think they can't get rid of the word of God, because it was so prolific and everywhere. And it doesn't matter how many buildings they destroy, how many books they burn, they were never going to be able to get rid of it. They just have no chance. So all they can do now is obfuscate and lie about the past. And I know that's, by mainstream academic standards, that's nuts. And what I just said is absolutely insane. It should be thrown away as just the ramblings of an absolute madman. I know, but I don't believe the chronological record. I have no shame in saying that. When Jesus Christ told those people in front of him, "You will see me come back with my kingdom very soon. I won't be long," after he ascended into Pentecost, and those people went out and made disciples of all nations and pretty much converted a lot of people into Christendom, Gentiles and Jews included. It doesn't matter who. The gospel was free to all. Paul was made a minister to do such a thing. I think Christendom spread, and I think that was well documented. And these people died for their beliefs in horrible ways and did not repent, did not turn from their belief, did not let go of their faith in Christ, because they knew it was real in their time. Undeniably real, because they saw him die, they saw him resurrect, they saw the truth, they saw the miracles, they saw the dead being risen, they saw the apostles healing the sick and healing the blind and raising the dead and speaking in tongues, and they saw miracles before their very eyes in that early time. And they converted and believed until death and were killed for their beliefs by the Roman Empire as punishment, and they kept the faith till the end. And I think not long after that, about 40 years after 70 AD, after 33 AD, after his resurrection, about 70 AD, roughly 77 AD, I think after a tribulation event, after the destruction of the temple, as prophesied, I think he came back. And I think our history is a lie from there. And I think those people were sincere in their belief. And I have no reason to deny Jesus's words weren't true. And I think the historical record, though corrupt and mixed up, actually does prove it, with the destruction of the temple documented by Josephus in the 1st century. He even said, I think he even said something along the lines of, "I wouldn't write this down if it wasn't witnessed by everybody else, because it sounds so unbelievable, but there were literally chariots of fire and armies in the sky raining down upon the temple." It's kind of, I don't know what to make of that, but that happened, guys, and everybody saw it, so I can't just pretend it didn't happen, And that's basically what he said, and obviously that's a Jewish man, a Roman Jewish guy who would not want to give any credence to Christ. But even he had to give in the devil his due in his eyes at that point. You know what I mean? It's kind of not calling Jesus the devil, but from their perspective, he was a blasphemer. He was calling himself God and all this type of stuff. And if you read the Hebrew text on the situation, they believe he's burning in hell in excrement. You know what I mean? For what he did. They don't like the guy. So yeah, I assume they would have bit him from their own text, because they're still looking forward to their own Messiah, the one that would bring war and conquer and all these other things. They rejected Christ. But again, the history is one thing, but the history of man, I think, is corrupt. the words of Jesus, I believe the promise was made that his word would last forever. And now his written word is one thing, but I think you can know Jesus told the truth by simply asking, and he will reveal it to you in a very spiritual, tangible sense as well. And I think a lot of people don't realize we live in a spiritual reality where these things are real, and you can actually basically just have information downloaded to you from God if he wants to do that to you. He can reveal things to you. He can show you things in dreams and visions and the rest. It never ended. A lot of people just don't realize that's possible. So it's easy to put down a piece of paper and writing and ink. I get it, but you can't put down a personal revelation and vision from God himself. You just, it's a personal thing. And I think a lot of people's faith or belief is based on faith alone because they've read the word and have just trusted the word, which is great. I would say my faith is based on a lot more than just ink on paper personally. And again, I keep stressing this again. That's not enough to convince anybody. I know it's not.
Well,
I'm
definitely not asking you to take a evangelical stance. I'm simply just kind of exploring the boundaries for my own sake and for anyone listening, because I think it's important. And also to say that the historicity and epistemology problem is one that weighs heavy on me, which is why I wanted to speak to you, because 2 days ago or whatever it was, I came upon, I don't know how it's been this long that I only now am finding the concept of the millennial reign of Christ, which, to backtrack a little bit, one issue that I've had, and I'll probably have already stitched into the video of this podcast for those listening, but like when you're describing that we have a tremendous amount of record of these quote old world buildings, right? They're just completely misplaced. How did they get there? Who built them? It's completely unreasonable that they were built horse and buggy people in the times that they're stated. Going down this continuous rabbit hole, like where did they come from? But having no concrete answer. There's this idea around the internet, like Tartaria. It's some sort of kingdom. Some people say it was far-reaching as the Americas and covered kind of the entire globe. Some maps and drawings that we have place it somewhere in Eurasia. We have flags, we have maps, we know something of its name existed. And then this idea of the millennial reign of Christ comes in and says, this feeling that you're in some sort of disillusioned state. I'm sure you're probably also familiar with like the Kali Yuga, the end of the cycle in the Vedic texts. We're in clearly some sort of degenerated upside down world. The Gnostics obviously have this idea that the demiurge is corrupted. We have like this false blueprint reality. It's a prison. So you're starting to see flashes in all of these different places. And this is now a biblical or Christian-esque version or explanation for how we're here and how those buildings are here and all of that stuff. So I'm with you. Like a long time ago, I threw traditional historicity into the trash, but I'm also using texts of philosophers and guys like Josephus or Herodotus or the Bible, like as ways to tether to what the hell is going on. Like, where are we? When are we? And as you're familiar and probably talk about ad nauseum, this is extremely unsettling if you have nothing to grab onto. And so my hesitation, or I'm trying to treat it with a fair amount of rigor and intellectual honesty, is the Christian story is, I don't want to dismiss it with a word like convenient, but because it is kind of a linear story, it's something huge to grab onto, right? It's almost like this giant rope that's like, if you just grab on here, whether you take the millennial reign of Christ, which is definitely a little more on the schizo side, but I'm here for it, or even you take the traditional, we're still waiting for the Antichrist chronology. It's this huge like rope, and it feels like you're dismissing all of this other stuff that I still hold in fairly high regard, like all of these different spiritual teachers, texts, etc. So you see where I'm kind of coming at the question. Like I want to be exploring like outside of that personal experience, which I'm 100% open to. I've had a number of very interesting supernatural experiences. They haven't been tethered to Christ alone, although I have shared this story before, so it's probably worth bringing back up now. But the first one that I've ever experienced was actually I was going through a facilitated breathwork ceremony. Also, as a background for myself, I was completely substance free my entire life. I was like very much like a goody two shoes kid. Substance free, only drank alcohol a little bit in university for about a 2-year window, and then stepped away from that just because, for whatever reason, wasn't a part of my life. I wasn't called to those vices. I wasn't, whatever. I'm not trying to moralize, but I was always very weary of exogenous experience, especially spiritually. Like I didn't want to do psychedelics. Like I always felt like I could know and experience God simply through things like prayer. And so breathwork was something I had never experimented with. Went through this experience, facilitated music, set the intentions. It was in a group setting, very intense. It was like a 45-minute session. So you can really get some like pretty profound feelings. And so by the end of it, there's like the come down where you like hold your breath for a long hold, slow release. And that's when you're typically going to get some sort of extra sensory experience with visuals. And in that, saw kind of like, DMT-esque sort of fractal imagery. But in that image, it was all of these kind of like X's and shapes splaying off of an undisturbed cross in the middle. And again, I didn't call out to Christ in that moment. I always felt and have been using the word God for my relationship to the Creator because I was still sussing out the Jesus character. But I found that was interesting. And whether that was precognition because I was raised Christian, who knows? I think it's probably a yes and situation. I'm not writing it off one way or the other, but it's cataloged and it's worth bringing back up now, given the conversation. So
Yeah.
I've never fully abandoned the Christ thing, and I'm very interested in exploring it.
That tends to be the journey, though. You're going to have many more of those experiences in your time, I imagine, before you make any final decision on whether you're going with it or not. And I get that, and I think it's up to every individual to have those experiences. And it sounds like Christ is doing a work in your life as it is, and he's meeting you where you're at and giving you what you need to see when you need to see in to lead you to the truth, if that's the case. I mean, I don't know where you're going to end up. I couldn't say. I think it's a personal journey for everybody at the end of the day. And if you still need to go and do what you need to do and see what you need to see before you can be convinced of anything, then I think God will give you the time and allow you to do those things at his own time to bring you to wherever he needs to bring you to. And I have faith in that at the end of the day. And it's what works for some doesn't work for others necessarily. And I know, and again, I understand your issue not wanting to chuck out all of history. I really get that, and I'm not saying events didn't happen that have been documented in history. I'm saying the chronology is wrong. They're placing them at the wrong point in the wrong dates.
It's actually not the history. I don't mind chucking out the chronology altogether, like the traditional calendar. Especially one thing I wanted to bring up was like the lunar calendar, the 13 rather than 12 months, and how that relates to this whole situation. But before we go into that, I'm more so referencing that I have found truth in extra biblical texts and extra Christian schools of thought. And I can't deny that I feel like there's truth with a capital T in some of these sorts of things, right? These other religious schools, faith histories, whether it's the Norse sagas and European paganism, which is like, obviously you share genetic lineage, I share genetic, we got two red beards here. Like that's part of our blood to some degree, more recent history, probably Christendom. So that matters to me a lot. I don't want to throw that out wholesale. And even like you're alluding to, like the Easter, I kind of deny outright I reject forms of Buddhism, but like there's truth there as well. There's experience of meditation and yoga and these other things. The Kali cycle, like I described, seems to map onto this very well. How do you constellate those extra biblical, extra Christian truths?
Well, I think they are right in many ways in their descriptions of the nature of reality. I think Eastern mysticism, a lot of it, and that's a broad umbrella, by the way. There's many conflicting, and you understand, I'm sure your audience understands when I say that. I'm not trying to pigeonhole everybody into one homogenous block because it's not. Like there's such vast differences in belief when it comes to Eastern mysticism. But if you want to go something like, let's say just Taoism and the principle of duality and what it is to rectify that as an individual, I think they have a lot right about the nature of reality in their descriptions of dualism and how things function here in this world, in this creation that we find ourselves in. Obviously, a lot of Buddhists, the idea of reaching nirvana or reaching a state of perfection in their own mind, like the Buddha in some way where they can reconcile those differences and then come full circle to the point where they can live in the world as a bodhisattva where they know the truth but still choose to play the role of being a normal person within it. And that's kind of It's kind of like this. It's that chart, isn't it, where they start off
Yeah.
stupid to get really smart, then they're back to where they started, but now they're really smart again. It's kind of that's what kind of Buddhism does for you. And Buddhism and these ways, as they call, because the Tao means the way, they can kind of give you a way to function in the world and reconcile the problem of evil, the problem of good, and the dualistic nature of reality. But they don't tackle the problem of there being a God separate from you. They don't even deal with it half the time. They're not even talking about it. It's not actually something they're looking to deal with. It's more like a way of helping an individual navigate through reality as it is and explaining how it functions very well. And I think they're right in many ways about the functioning reality of the creation. But that's all it is, the creation religions. They're obsessed with the nature, the creation, the sun, the cycle of life in a way, or the balance of the ecosystems, things like this, but they're not wholly concerned with a creator. And I think Christendom stands out above all the rest, and even against many other monotheistic religions out there, as it's the only thing that's wholly concerned with having a relationship with the creator and how also to reconcile your differences with the creation and the corruption in a way that's actually productive, in a sense that gains real supernatural tangible results where you change as an individual, because I find, this is from personal experience, you go through the Taoist thing and it's not really about changing you necessarily. It's about making you conform to the way it is. That's really what it comes down to. Taoism is actually a really good state religion for like Shinto, like Japan, feudal Japan, for example, for this reason, it makes you become accepting of and at one with the corruption in a sense, because it's kind of like, well, you need to understand evil to know what it is to have good, and you can't have one without the other. This type of idea starts to settle in, and as though it sounds comforting, I find it's quite what's the word, limiting in a sense. It's quite passive. It makes you accepting of evil as though they are two equals in perpetual balance with each other, or there's a dance, good and evil. But when you look at Christianity, it doesn't say that. It says, look, there is God and there is goodness, and evil or darkness is just the absence of light. They're not equal in any way, and if you have light, there is no darkness. It's very simple. And some of these dualistic principles can fall apart very quickly from a Christian God perspective. When you actually start seeing it from God's perspective and how it is, it's like the devil isn't God's equal. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, the devil is defeated. He has nothing on God, and the devil can only play with what God's already created. He can create nothing for himself. But then people kind of mix in these dualistic principles, probably through Zoroastrianism as well, kind of got mixed in with the Gnosticism that kind of seeps its way into Christian principles, where you get this odd view. It's like devils versus angels, or Jesus versus the devil, and as though like they're forever in a dance of equals, and it's just not the case. Like Christianity is making it clear he is defeated, he is done for. Evil is distance from God. It's more of a spectrum rather than a dualism, and it's kind of like the further away you are from God, the darker it gets. And do you know what I mean? So it's not quite the same thing. Yeah, it's wholly different in its nature. And I find if you follow the way of Christ, you end up getting real positive results in your life. And I don't mean like you'll get good stuff, material things, more of a change, or a born again, as we call it, that actually bears good fruit and makes you see the necessity of doing good. Not because it saves you, but because you want to. This real personal transformation can take place. And I just find you don't actually get from the Eastern perspectives. But I'm not saying they're wrong. They have really great details on the creation and how it functions. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Sure,
and
for sure.
I think a lot of Christians don't want to look there because they're scared of what, but I find I've learned a lot about the nature of reality through those religions and those worldviews. But when it comes to salvation, there's only one that offers it.
Okay, this is good, because I do want to understand what you mean by salvation. What do you envisage as the final judgment? Like, is it an end state rather than nature having a cyclical, essentially like the idea that time is in some sense a line, and we're moving towards a state where we will be reunited with God in this final, when he remakes the heavens, and then, right, that's kind of like we had a start date that's moving towards an eternal end date, and that will
I think it's more psychedelic than we can understand, to be honest. I think this is the thing. Everyone wants the answer to the nature of reality and how it's all going to work out. And I would say I'm not God. I can't see it from his perspective. We are
Okay.
so limited in our perceptions of reality from our viewpoint that I don't know how time functions. Is it linear? Is it cyclical? Is it a spiral? I don't really know because I don't see it from God's perspective. I wasn't there when he laid the foundations of creation and the earth itself. I think it would be prideful of me to assume that I could ever understand the plan in a sense, and how it actually all functions and works. But if I was to give the basic Christian understanding, it's that mankind walked with God in the Garden of Eden in a perfected form originally, but then he became corrupted through an outside influence. We'll call it the serpent, but then there's many interpretations you can go from there, whatever you want to say the serpent was. But it convinced Eve and Adam to rebel and to do the one thing they shouldn't have done. And that act of rebellion is what made them fall in opposition to or against the way of God, in a sense. And that act of rebellion made them fall into a corrupted state, shall we say. And God knew the plan of the serpent was to do this because there's a war in heaven, and they didn't like that God was giving attention to humanity, basically. So they tried to corrupt God's creation. But God knew this and made a prophecy and basically said, look, I know your plan. I know you're going to go ahead and mix yourselves with humans and create Nephilim monsters, and you're going to try and create your own bloodline within my creation. And he already saw the whole thing. And he made it clear in his own prophecy at the very beginning. I'll put enmity between your seed and their seed, the human seed and the serpent seed. You will bite their heel, but they'll crack your skull, basically. You may hinder them, but they'll destroy you. And then we have this period of time where then the humans have to propagate in this state of sin on earth, unable to be reconciled with God because of the path they chose. Okay. But he never gave up on his creation. So the story is that he chose a people. And these were not good people. They were like pagan, child sacrificing, Baal worshippers, and all sorts of problems, but he chose a people and he called it Israel. And he worked with them and he fought with them, and they fought back, and he proved his honesty to them through time and their rebellion. They rejected him many times, went back to their old ways. He kept coming back to them, making promises, prophecies, fulfilling those prophecies. Eventually, it showed that as long as you're patient, you will get what I promise. And he kind of molded out of these people a way of making them incorruptible and sinless as much as they possibly could. And through atonement, through the sacrifice in the temple, through God's method, he was trying to give them a way to maintain that lineage of being pure and not mixing themselves with corruption in any way. And again, these people fought with him. They wrestled with God for millennia, and they rejected him, came back many times, but he always chose a people, made promises to people, from Abraham all the way through to David, to obviously we have Christ, who came from these people eventually through these bloodlines. And the whole point was to maintain this pure, sin-free sacrifice style people so they could birth the Messiah, because they have to keep that going, And obviously when Christ comes, that's where he crushes the skull of the serpent, and you get the promise fulfilled through Christ, so that he's reconciled mankind back to God through him. So God sent an aspect of himself through Christ. And I don't claim to understand that mystery, how that works. I think, again, it's fifth dimensional, multidimensional, psychedelic principles that we just cannot understand. And people have had wars over the Trinity concept, or whether he is God or he is the Son of God or whatever that. But I don't care. I'm okay with some mystery. I'm more concerned with what he did. And if you understand this fulfillment of this prophecy back to Adam, all the way to Christ, and then you add in that then he established his kingdom and proved who he was after his resurrection, conquering death by resurrecting the dead to rule with him. It's kind of, this man has mastered and conquered death itself, and death didn't creep into the world until the original sin. So it's kind of, he's defeated that thing, but now it's a choice. It's kind of, okay, so you can choose to take this gift of reconciliation or not, but it's kind of a sifting now of the wheat and the tares. There's some people who will love the world and want to stay in this corrupted state and want to be in this way where they don't have a relationship with the Father because they like the stuff they've got. They like the sin. They like that nature. They're of the world. They're worldly. That's what that means, But Christ says, my kingdom isn't of this world. Yes, I might be able to create amazing things while I'm here, but really the kingdom's in heaven. You know, it's of a different place. It's of a different style. It's of a thing you can't really understand. I can give you a taste of the kingdom on earth, which I think is what the millennial reign was. But really, what's awaiting for you on the new heaven and earth is not this. You know, it's psychedelic in principle. You cannot comprehend it from your limited sense perception here, is what he's trying to promise people. And being saved is that when this earth finally comes to a point after the little season where there's final judgment upon all the living and all the dead, because we are not our bodies, we are souls, you know, that are embodied in a sense. We are living souls in bodies, but we have this spirit aspect to us. Well, once the body's gone and the flesh is gone, and all you're left with is your naked soul before God, judgment is there. It's simple, because the wages of sin are death, and it's not like your body dying, it's spiritual death. It's annihilation. It's gone from existence, because darkness is not compatible with light. And once you end up in the place of light where God is, the source of all light, you'll disappear. Do you understand? Like, you're not going to be able to withstand, you're going to burn. It's simple, really, and you're going to disappear. Darkness cannot abide in light. You know, turn a light on in a room, darkness disappears. So it's kind of, if you're saved, then you're giving yourself to Christ and you're a new creation. When that inevitability comes where you're before God, you'll be covered by him, and you'll be protected by him, and then you'll be able to make it through to the next thing, which is the promise of a new heaven and a new earth. A lot of Christians today have this weird view that, oh, you die and you go to heaven. It's more complicated than that. The story is really complicated. In fact, when you get the narrative laid out, it isn't complicated is the wrong word. I'm just saying it's got more nuance than the mainstream cartoonized caricature version of heaven and hell, you know, which we have of Christendom.
And you're obviously speaking to someone who appreciates the nuance, and I'm trying to explore what exactly it is that you believe in and you constellate as the truth. Because, for instance, you referenced in that explanation, you're not so arrogant to assume that you know the nature of, say, like the Trinity, or what that new heaven and new earth would look like. Right? You're humble enough to admit there's a tremendous amount you don't know, if not most of it. But I think that what I wrestle with the Christian position is that I almost feel like there's an equivalent arrogance to say that, like, but also your soul is going to be destroyed if you do not accept the answer of Jesus Christ. I've had experiences with God without invoking Jesus Christ as a name. And like, just like I wouldn't deny your experiences and say, like, oh no, Zach, that was actually like you calling upon God, but that was a demon that was pretending to be God. I wouldn't say the same thing when you're lying on the floor having your experiences, right? So I know, because of my knowing, because at a soul level I've interacted with God and he's done miracles in my life, I could never deny his existence or my relationship with him. And that is growing and evolving as we go. But to say to me that, like, if I were to pass away based on my stance on Christ today, for instance, like if we just cut the Zoom feed and it ends here, I will not live on in some sort of eternal state like you're alluding to.
Well, it's interesting, because, I mean, Christ says, you know, me and the Father are one. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. If you have a relationship with God, which many people did before Christ and made it through, you know, and made it on God's good side in a way, and I don't think someone like Abraham, who lived before Christ, is suffering damnation, you know, or being burnt up, but he knew the Father and he had a relationship with him. And I think having a relationship with Christ is having a relationship with the Father. But if you can have a relationship with the Father independent of Christ, then all more power to you. But most people don't understand or can't reconciliate a relationship with an unknowable entity so easily. Christ humanizes him, and it gives a way for people to understand the Father from a human perspective. And obviously what it means, how much he loves us, that he would suffer for us the most heinous death on our behalf, is like a testimony to the love that he has for his creation. I think the story of Christ, or sending Christ, is a way to give people a way to understand who God is and what he's willing to do for us. But that, like I said, there are people who have existed throughout history who made it to the first resurrection, Abraham's bosom, we'll call it, who were great people throughout history, who were God-fearing men, you know. And again, they didn't know Christ, but I'm sure they were saved. So who am I to say that someone like you has a relationship with God and knows the Father, but doesn't understand Christ, isn't saved necessarily? But Christ did say, nobody comes to the Father except through me.
Yeah,
So
well,
there is that
exactly.
too, you know.
Yeah, so
So
I mean,
but
obviously,
again, it's
there's
complicated, and I'm not trying to be arrogant with this.
no, no,
It's
no.
just,
I'm not even
yeah,
asserting that you are. I actually think you're extremely humble, and it's why I like the discourse, and appreciate the discourse. I say I guess I'm just simply because I can feel, not just hear, but I can feel your conviction. When I feel that and I experience that in others, I explore it with tremendous curiosity because
hmm.
we are unbelievably few. The nature of this conversation and whoever arrives to it, these are real seekers. You know, we've been yapping on here for an hour and a half. There's more to come. Um, and like this is by no means the end of probably dialogue between me and you, as well
Hmm.
as my dialogue with God and the universe. I will continue to read voraciously, seek voraciously, pray. Um, so yeah, it's just an exploration, and I appreciate you being patient with my
No, no
pressing.
problem.
But
I like these conversations because it tests me, and
for sure,
it's hard to know what you believe until you hear it said out loud.
yeah,
You
exactly.
know, and I think everybody should practice that, to be honest, especially if you're in the conspiracy game. If you believe something, all right, say it out loud, record yourself, explain exactly what it is you believe, and then listen to it and ask yourself, do I actually believe that? You know, because when it's in your head, it sounds different. When you're always in your head, it's not the same as when you say it out loud. That's good advice for anyone who's seeking anything. And again, my faith is solid because of personal experience. This is why I'm only working backwards from there. Um, Personal transformation is why I believe, you know, and then ever since then, with that conviction of that personal experience, nothing has happened yet through my research to contradict it or to make me doubt that Christ kept his word or he was who he said he was. Um, and I guess I'm lucky and I'm thankful that I've been given that blessing to have that. And I know not everybody does, and many people are struggling with their faith because they don't have a tether point like I do, which I was blessed to have. And I don't know what the solution to that is. I truly don't. I don't want to say, well, you just didn't pray hard enough, because I don't think it works like that. I think there are many people who are sincerely on their knees seeking God, screaming for help, and he never responds sometimes. And I don't know what to make of that. I don't. You know, it's a mystery, and it's a struggle, and it's a problem, and I don't know how to rectify it. And I'm sorry, but I can't apologize on behalf of God. He has a plan, and everything in his own time. I would say to those people, be patient. Some people had to wait 40 years, or some people had to wait 300 years for some of his promises to come to fruition when you read the stories in the Bible. Not everything happened instantly. Think of it more as if he hears your prayer, it's like a seed was planted. And it can seem like a long time before you see the results of the seed, you know, and it might seem insignificant before it sprouts, but then that seed could turn into a tree one day. And that could take years, but that'll be your prayer answered eventually, you know. I think it's not easy to live in the world. And I think God, although his timing is not our timing and all things are possible through him, he can only help us in so much as the world allows him to while we're in this state. You know, so he's got to work within the parameters of this world as well in some respect, which is why he had to send his son into here to get to us. You know what I mean? It was his ways are not our ways. His perspectives are not our perspectives, and the way he interacts with the world is not the way we interact with the world. So it requires faith. It does, but I think those who wait long enough will eventually see the answer to those prayers or the sincere answers to their questions. But how long that's going to be, I couldn't tell you. You know,
Yeah,
who am I? Who am I to
of
tell
course, of
that? You know,
course.
yeah,
But as far as how we interact with the world, you have brought yourself to the belief that we are post return, post millennial reign, and in, from the best we can tell, this little season of Satan.
yeah,
So many philosophers have alluded to this kind of thing. Obviously, Nietzsche spoke about it. I just finished reading Ride the Tiger from Evola, this sort of decadent, upside down clown world. There are many in our generation, young men and women alike, that look around and say, "What the fuck is going on? Something is deeply wrong."
yeah.
Um, And it's weirder than just, you know, the wrong political parties in office or they're showing too much porn on TV. Those are parts of it, but clearly there are layers. And anyone who's arrived to this conversation through my content or yours will feel that on a deep, deep level. And so tethering to some sort of story or understanding when and where we are, at least in my own experience, that matters a lot for how then one acts in temporality, time and space, and what to do. So how are you navigating the here and now with that sort of understanding?
Well,
and why is it important that like, why have you stuck with that truth? Why does that, as opposed to just saying, okay, that's an interesting conspiracy theory, I've explored it, whatever, but I'm going to stick to the Antichrist is on his way and we're waiting for the return of
well,
Christ?
first of all, too much physical, tangible evidence that the Earth has gone through a destructive event, which is akin to tribulation, which means it's already happened. And that I believe when Christ told the people in front of him, "You'll see me coming back," he kept his promise. You know, so the words of Christ are why I believe it's already happened. Fundamentally, the physical evidence comes after the fact, but it's extremely compelling. More than compelling, it's indisputable as far as I'm concerned. It's, again, to go watch a few of my presentations we've done on the matter, but it's kind of getting irrefutable now. So, and also the understanding that we have a conspiracy at all to understand is because Christ already ruled for 1,000 years and there's a cover up at play. Secret societies, that their job is to distract you from realizing that this has already happened and to obfuscate the fact. We live in a clown world in this little season because clowns are entertainers, and entertainers are to keep your attention away from the truth, you know. And my work with the Nephilim look like clowns kind of bleeds into that more in a more modern sense. But when I wrote the original book, I wasn't even on this wavelength, so it might be something I'm gonna have to add into the work afterwards. But if there was ever a time where the devil was let loose to run rampant and make people give in to their own vices and to make sin the only way to get ahead in the world, this seems like the time, you know. And in terms of context, it works, it fits, you know. And I believe this because it is like a glove. It seems to make sense of everything I've been researching for the past 10 years with conspiracy. All of a sudden, everything clicks into place. Why would they lie? Because Christ was here. And it's the biggest thing you could ever imagine. It kind of feels like the bottom of the rabbit hole, to be honest. But I'm wise enough. When I say that, I mean, I've been here long enough, I'm tired enough to realize there's always a new revelation around every 3 or 4 years when it comes to learning the truth. And this is just the current one. So this is important. Get it under your belt. Get to know it. Maybe we are wrong, but if we are, at least you had an alternative answer for a possibility that could have been the case when everything does finally go down. You know, I'm one that doesn't like to be caught off guard. I like to know every option available for what the possibility of what's happening before me actually is. And if people don't realize that the little season is a possibility, then it's kind of like you're practicing and preparing for the wrong game. So you spend your whole life or a season getting really, really good at soccer, football as we call it, you know what I mean? And you become a master at kicking that ball around and getting in the net in preparation for the big game. But then the match day comes and you should have been preparing for golf. You know what I mean? Because it was a completely different game. You were off by many degrees about what the truth of the situation was, you know, because you were always told this is what's around the corner, tribulation's around the corner, prepare for that, you know. But if it's already happened, the board game's different, the game's different now, and we're in a different place. So what we need to look out for in a little season is that they're going to gather an army to go make war with something big, and it's called the Camp of Saints. And I don't know how that's going to pan out. I've theorized the alien agenda is going to get in play with all of this in many ways to convince people to go and attack something like a mothership of some kind. But when you start getting biblical about these concepts, we have a floating city in the Bible. It's called New Jerusalem. And that would look like a mothership from a secular alien space believing perspective. You know what I mean? It's kind of, there are parallels you can draw, and we can see that in this world, atheism, space travel, evolution, you know, all these ideas are what drives humanism today, and our narrative. That's what we believe we're a part of. Mankind will take control of his own evolution and travel the stars. So we've kind of been brainwashed and prepared in this little season to accept aliens when they turn up, or to interpret anything like a floating city as spaceship from space. We can't. A lot of people don't have a framework in their brains to see it any other way, because that's what the programming has done for us in this little season. when you get the biblical perspective on board, you have alternative ways of viewing these such events. And again, I'm a Christian first, conspiracy theorist second, and I can't help but put these things together and realize this is a big possibility because we can see the agendas at play. It fits. So that's why I believe, because it fits too well. And again, I'm open to being wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but at least I won't be unprepared if I'm right. Do you get what I mean?
Love it. And I
It's
mean,
that
the
kind of thing.
reason it's captured me over the last like 72 hours is because of how much it fits. It's like you're solving a puzzle and there's like a missing gap, but like the box didn't have that piece. And you've just been like running around your house like it has to be here, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just an obvious shape. I can kind of see how it's formed. I'm hearing about Hyperborea, Agartha, Atlantis. What's at the North Pole? Like what's going on here? Why are these old maps shaped this way? Where do these buildings come from? All these kind of nebulous questions, seemingly related, unrelated, hard to say. But this sort of theory brings a lot together for me. So I'm really interested in it. And I don't, again, want to turn this into a total rehashing, but some of those things that specifically, like the idea that Hyperborea or Thule or Agartha, like this hidden kingdom at the center of the earth, like you're alluding to, could be this camp of saints place. And
Mm-hmm.
is the understanding that Jesus and his saints are there?
Well, it's twofold, really. There's no consensus on exactly how this is playing out, but it could be that at the end of a millennial reign, the saints receded to this place in the middle of the earth and put up a barrier, like a wall, and that's where they're waiting out the little season for it to happen. It's an appointed time that has to happen, and it's like a testing time of some kind that we don't really know. Jesus could be there with them in the center on his throne, um, emanating his light of the world, and we call it the aurora borealis, maybe, or something like. I don't really know, or Christ could be at the right hand of the Father in heaven, and his saints could have interceded for him on the earth on his behalf through that time. And Christ wasn't physically on earth necessarily, but he was in spirit, if you get what I mean. It's twofold. Some people say, Christ wasn't physically here, just his saints. Some people say it was a bit of both, and angels were involved too at that time. I don't know, but we do know in Revelation it says, Satan will gather a whole army to march up the breadth of the earth, whose number is of the sands of the sea, to make war with the camp of saints, the beloved city. So there's something in the north, there's something up the breadth of the earth that will be surrounded, in which the saints are residing within. It could be that the camp of saints is a city full of these resurrected people from the first resurrection, who are in a beautiful city in the center of the earth. And that's it. That could just be it. And Christ is still in heaven. And after the destruction of that war, fire comes down, destroys everything, including the armies that surround the saints. Then New Jerusalem comes down. So if you want to go off the timeline, New Jerusalem doesn't turn up until after the final war. So alien agenda might fall to the wayside there in some way, but we don't know exactly when a New Jerusalem really comes down, because it could be visible before it descends. We don't know. We don't know exactly. We're not given any details exactly on what's going on there. But it couldn't be that Christ doesn't join his saints until after the judgment, and then he comes to establish the new heaven and earth. If he renews the earth, after judgment, because it even says the earth is eternal, and humans aren't supposed to live in heaven. We're supposed to live on the earth. That's what we're created for. Problem is, the earth became corrupt along with humanity in that beginning problem. So the whole story ends with, we're going to renew everything and make it whole again, and then the earth is as it was before the fall. Mankind has been rectified back to its original state before the fall, and we can do this again properly. But we've learned a thing or two thanks to the events of the last 6,000, 7,000 years. You know what I mean? So it's kind of in a way, it's a growing period, I suppose, what we're living through, if you want to reinterpret what I'm discussing here. But yeah, this narrative that I'm weaving, it sounds like every film you've ever watched in your entire life, doesn't it? That involves aliens. It sounds like exactly what the devil would do in a little season to convince people to go make war with Jesus. They won't know it's Jesus. And the only way they can do that is to say it's aliens. And what if it's like the city just becomes visible? And it's more like we're under attack by interdimensionals rather than aliens. It could be I don't know how they're going to spin the narrative necessarily. But something weird's going to happen in our future, I believe. Very weird. And it's not going to look like tribulation, which is why a lot of Christians are going to lose their faith. They're going to lose it because it's not the playbook they're ready for. It's not going to play out how they're expecting it to play out, you know. And I think a lot of people will capitulate and join the army, even Christians, because they don't realize that, you know, that's the camp of saints. That's Jesus Christ, because they think it should have been. They were waiting for it all to happen. Many Christians today believe they're the ones that get to be resurrected and rule with Christ for 1,000 years. You know, but there were plenty of people who were beheaded for his name's sake and martyred for his name's sake before the temple was destroyed. And it's likely those people who got resurrected and got to reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Why would it be us 2,000 years later? This other contention you have from the mainline atheistic secularist view. It's like, well, it's been 2,000 years. Where is he? You know, you don't think it's been long enough? It's time to just give up on your faith already. You know, so people say, no, he's definitely coming. He's definitely coming back, and they keep the faith. With all power to them for keeping their faith. But I mean, it's hard to keep your faith when it has been 2,000 years after he said he wouldn't be back. That he wouldn't be back. He'd be back soon, is what he said. But how soon? Soon 2,000 years isn't soon, you know. So it's kind of, this answers that problem.
So who are we? You know, who does that make us?
We are either the descendants of those who lived through the millennial reign, and many who didn't want to shut up were locked away in insane asylums or killed. And we are the re-educated descendants of the re-educated masses, I suppose, through the new systems that were taken over by secret societies, all the schools and systems. And we've just had less and less knowledge taken away from us with each passing generation. And we now don't know where we are or when we are. One working theory, but it could be a lot of nonsense, is that we may be the rest of the dead resurrected for the second resurrection. And we only say this because in Revelation 20, it does say all about the first resurrection. Those who were beheaded get to rule with Christ for 1,000 years. And then it says the rest of the dead are not resurrected until the 1,000 years has ended. That's the second resurrection. So that means, does that mean immediately when the 1,000 years has ended, suddenly there's a mass resurrection of the rest of the dead all throughout history? Or is that at the end of a little season for judgment only is the rest of the dead resurrected? Most mainline Christians are down with the idea as there is no second chance. The rest of the dead are all damned and doomed. They're done for. They get resurrected for judgment at the very end of time, and that's it. It could be, though, that they're resurrected immediately after the 1,000 years has ended, and they flood the earth, and were the descendants of those people, if not those people themselves. Like, it could be that. We could be the rest of the dead. We could have lived once before, is what I'm saying, before Christ.
And the purpose of our presence then would be to have a chance,
yes,
to accept the truth.
It's a working theory. It's not something a lot of people agree with, even in the community, and it's something I speculated on when I first started this. But even I'm not wholly sure it has legs. It's just an idea, but I wouldn't hitch your faith on that. It's more likely we're just the descendants of people who lived through the reign, and we've just been lied to and moved and relocated and re-educated to the point now where we're just completely ignorant of our true history. You know, we've been lied to about where we came from, basically, and who we are and who our descendants actually are. And that's it. And that it could just be as simple as that. I like the rest of the dead idea. Don't get me wrong. I think it seems like something a fair, loving God would do. It would give a chance for everybody throughout history to have a chance to choose Christ, because you can live in a time where Christ can be known. But also you can choose the devil if you want to too. So it's choice. It gives free will back to people. But at the same time, we don't know that for sure, because it says at the Great White Throne Judgment, you know, the rest of the dead are spat out and from the sea, from the earth, and they're judged on their works. So I don't know. I don't know if people do get that second chance. You know, it's delving into reincarnation stuff, isn't it? And that's a big no-no in Christianity. So there's a lot of contention about that idea. But some people like it, some people really hate it. But I'm not sold either way on it, even though I've speculated on it ad nauseum. Even I don't know if that's the case. And I think it doesn't matter. Just get yourself right with Christ and you'll be covered in that final judgment either way. So that's my go-to on the answer to that, you know.
It's all very interesting. Something about this whole thing feels very true to me. So I'm going to continue my exploration, share that with my audience, but I know that you have to go soonish. I want to be respectful of your time and, of course, anyone that's made it thus far. I do want to share, I had this written down because as I was thinking about this beforehand, I have 3 closer questions for you. But before that, I think the scope of what we're suggesting here is so incredibly large that people, I mean, including myself included, I'm still figuring this out, but it's so big. It's like, how is it even possible that we could have gotten along with this? I mean, it's just like down to the prima materia, basically, of everything we understand about everything, including
Mm.
chronology of history, but certainly who and where we are. Um, but there's a quote I want to share. Take it or leave it. It's from Adolf Hitler, but it's about the big lie, and I think it speaks very well to why it is possible that a big lie could be accepted as opposed to some of these more small niche psyops that are seemingly unrelated. The quote goes like this: "The broad masses of a nation more readily fall victim to the big lie than to the small lie. In the big lie, there's always a certain force of credibility, because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily. And thus, in the simplicity of their minds, they're more readily fall victim to the big lie than the small lie, because since they themselves often tell small lies in little matters, but would be ashamed to resort to large scale falsehoods, it would never even come to their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe that others would have the impudence to distort truth so infamously. Even though the facts which prove this to be so may be brought clearly to their minds, they will still doubt and waver and will continue to think that there is some other explanation. For the grossly impudent lie always leaves traces behind it, even after it has been nailed down, a fact which is known to all expert liars in the world and to those who conspire together in the art of lying."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the problem that's, I mean, anybody could have said that, fair enough, but the idea is people do implicitly trust authority, and it's kind of, I think people don't understand mankind's capacity for malevolence as well, because we're all, generally speaking, we're all quite good at heart. People try to be good, we fail, but it takes a special type of person to lie and be okay with it and not have a conscience about it. Most people don't. Most people don't have it in them to do that type of thing, which is what he's saying there. So we struggle to believe that others could do such a thing. And I'm kind of in the field of learning about malevolence. Nothing surprises me with what mankind is capable of. I can believe we've been lied to about this type of thing. But most people cannot wrap their head around the concept that somebody could tell such a lie, you know, which is what he's saying basically. And I get that, and that's a classic problem of evil. Most people when they encounter evil don't come away from it the same because it changes them, you know. And most people haven't encountered evil in their life, and they don't understand what people are capable of. And that's kind of, I don't wish people to be encountering evil, but I think eventually it happens to everybody at some point, and then they're forever changed, and then you'll understand, people are capable of lying. It's just most people are good at heart to begin with, or at least try to be good, because like I said, we have our problems. So yeah, I get that. That's an interesting quote.
Yeah, I love how your comment on it, and I also wanted to use that as a encouragement to those that are seeking consolation in rooms that they probably couldn't seek in person. Your podcast is exactly about that. That's what you're about to hop off and do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, seeking a community or people that can help you tether to some of these ideas, because I have, in my humble opinion, I have a pretty strong constitution, cerebrally and spiritually. I've walked these roads essentially completely isolated in a family that doesn't understand it, but I've been able to get on fine. And through the act of stepping out into the world and making content, I'm slowly starting to find my people across the world. But again, it's largely been an alone journey, and it's been extremely hard, and it still is extremely hard. So for those that need and are benefit from community, myself included. I mean, I'm going straight to your podcast after this because I want to hear the episodes that have already been there. But I just wanted to throw that in there because I think that what you're talking about and the tools you're giving people and the encouragements along the path, it's important. Like there is care that is needed along this path, because otherwise you'll just be deceived again, because it's simply too painful. The truth can be too painful compared to the comfortable lies. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to transition now to the final closer questions that I ask every guest. So the first of the three is, if you could go back to a younger version of yourself and tell him one thing, what would that be?
You don't know as much as you think you do.
Amazing. Secondly, what is one quote that's always stuck with you or that you try to live by?
Failure to prepare is preparing to fail.
And then finally, what do you believe is your unique gift to give the world?
Do people normally wait this long to answer this question?
No, I love it. The pregnant pauses. I want to give you space.
I've always wanted to help people. Ever since being a kid, it's whatever. I wanted to be a doctor at one point, quite stupidly. I'm not very good at maths, so I was always doomed to fail with that to begin with. But I tried. I left high school and went to go do biology, chemistry, maths, and philosophy, funnily enough, at A level. And I failed miserably at everything but philosophy. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a scientist. I'm an artist, fundamentally. So I was blessed with ability to draw and contextualize images in ways that can convey ideas to people that they can relate to. That's what an artist does at the end of the day. We take an idea and we try and make it visual so people can see the idea and feel the idea and understand the idea. And I feel like that's what I've got. And it's not something I worked to be able to do. It's something I was born with. I've never learned to draw. Let's put it that way. I just can. And even that is a testament to that some people in this world, God has a plan. And he will give you the tools that you need and that you are capable of using for your own individual purpose in this world. And it was through no work of your own. So I guess that's it. That's what I've got for you there.
Powerful. Well, I appreciate your time. Where can the people find more of you, and what are you working on that you're excited about?
So you can find me on YouTube. That's my home base, Understanding Conspiracy. To look for this logo here. I've stuck to my mic recently just because I was having fun with the laminate machine. But just look for the logo, look for my channel, Understanding Conspiracy. I'm also on podcast format, so most of my audio goes straight to there as well. My videos go straight to there as well, so you can get me on anywhere you get your podcast from. You can buy a copy of my book, The Nephilim Look Like Clowns, on Amazon. Just type in The Nephilim Look Like Clowns. You cannot miss it. I'm currently writing volume 2, and that will complete this series of volume 1 and 2. But all of my videos for the Nephilim Look Like Clown that this is all based on are available for free on YouTube. There's like a 45 episode series you can go and watch there to get all the visuals. The book is kind of a summary of all that work, kind of boxing it all off in text form. And that's basically where you'll find me, guys.
Incredible. Well, I appreciate your time again. I also want to shout out anyone that's made it thus far. The real soldiers always make it to the end. Obviously, you found this on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. You can continue to follow and subscribe there. Obviously, YouTube is also the home base for additional content, the behind-the-scenes vlogs of everything I'm building, standalone videos. You can follow on X and Instagram if you have those platforms and you're interested. But most importantly, thank you for your time and attention, your most valuable resources, spending them with myself and Paul today. Memento Mori, be the Renaissance.
And if he fails, at least fails while daring greater, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.